No time to waste today. Russia is making headlines by aggressively pushing along the Eastern Front. With a summit between Putin and Trump just around the corner in Alaska, the obvious question to ask is whether the offensive and the summit are connected. But the thing is, if they are, then the price that the Kremlin has paid is way higher than it may seem. So, today, let me catch you up on Russia's broader strategy in the East, the breakthrough, or breakthrough, that is happening there, some comments about the evolution in Ukraine's defensive line strategy over the last couple of years or so, and how to interpret the events that we are seeing, because it turns out that what we cannot observe is just as important as what we can, and the analysis that I am seeing about the breakthrough only tends to focus on what appears on a map. But let's begin with the Eastern Front. We are going to focus on two cities today. One is Pokrovsk, and the other is Chasiv Yar, which you may remember as the city just after Bakhmut. Pokrovsk is likely what you have heard about in the news over the last year. That is because it has been the key target of Russia's offensive in the region, which began in July 2024. Ukraine evacuated civilians from the city the next month, seeming to suggest that Ukrainian soldiers would also have to quickly fall back. But here we are a full year later, and Ukraine still controls the city, at least for now. It is abandoned and functionally destroyed, of course, but the fact that Ukrainian troops are still there gives you a sense of Russia's pace on this offensive. Why so slow? Well, it seems that Russia learned its lesson from the Battle of Bakhmut, the siege that occupied headlines prior to Pokrovsk. That resulted in an incredible number of Russian casualties, and, eventually, a mutiny that briefly pushed toward Moscow. It is the joy of urban combat. Plenty of places for defenders to hide, tight corridors as the invaders press forward, and plenty of snipers' nests to be concerned about. Russia has therefore chosen to go around both Pokrovsk's western and eastern flanks. The theory goes that if you can fully surround the city, Ukrainian defenders would eventually have to give up. Or, perhaps more likely, as Russian soldiers get close to enveloping the city, Ukraine will just withdraw to avoid further losses. Of course, this is not the only part of the front line. Russia has also exerted pressure to the northeast. Up here is the legacy of the Bakhmut campaign, as Russia pushes uphill toward Chasiv Yar. To be clear, its pace is even slower than what has been happening in Pokrovsk, but it will still be relevant in a moment. Now we can discuss the developments over the last week. Here is what the front looked like only a couple of days ago, and this is what it looks like now. To give you a sense of the scale, Russia's gains over the last 6 months range from about 250 square kilometers to 600. Over this time, Ukraine has been playing a game of trading land for Russian casualties, with the hope that eventually the Kremlin will struggle to hit its recruitment targets. At that point, Putin would have to terminate the offensive by default, sparing Ukraine from further losses. However, just this one push over the course of a couple of days has transferred 110 square kilometers. By all accounts, the underlying problem is a shortage of Ukrainian soldiers. When frontline positions only have so many humans defending them, eventually Russia will find a gap to exploit. This is not a situation where the front lines are fully staffed. There will always be holes, and the question is whether Russia can find them. Indeed, this happens on a daily basis, which is how Russia has been gaining ground over the course of the whole offensive. What makes this particular situation special, though, is that it went much further than normal. And if you are wondering why Ukraine does not simply exploit the salient that Russia has created, by flanking the new Russian positions, which seem to be vulnerable. I mean, look, you just collapse on the location here. Well, it is the same story. That would require more Ukrainian soldiers, and Kyiv does not have more Ukrainian soldiers to spare. An important caveat: this assumes that Russia has ample forces here at all. Hold that thought for a minute. It gets worse for Ukraine, though. Remember Russia's strategy to envelop Pokrovsk? Well, this sudden push could facilitate that much more rapidly than previously expected. Simply turn left and you are cutting off an even greater patch of land. Failing to do that, though, Russia could opt for a more ambitious plan. Turn right instead, and there is a larger pocket that Russia could exploit, which connects all the way over to Bakhmut. Either way, this would be very bad news for Ukraine. But let's talk about the outlook here, based on recent evolutions in defensive strategy. Ukraine is urging caution about rushing to judgment regarding what exactly this salient is. Now, we should all take that with a grain of salt, just as we would with any other statement like this from a leader. That said, the standard way that Russia pushes forward is with a handful of men taking a position, harassing any Ukrainians who come into the area, and then sustaining that position by receiving resupply via drones. If the mission is successful, only then do reinforcements enter the salient, at which point is when the front line meaningfully moves. So maybe the movement is an isolated case like I described, and the thing may eventually resolve itself favorably for Ukraine, or at least not that unfavorably, as the Russian troops have overextended themselves. It is worth noting here that days have passed at this point, and we have not seen much happen along the salient. That is a good sign for Ukraine. However, the flip side puts Ukraine in more trouble than I had previously suggested. It is not just about collapsing pockets. It is also that Ukraine's key defensive line is about here, which means that Russia is very close to getting behind it. This creates the always concerning domino problem, where one loss leads to yet more losses, because nothing is there to protect Ukrainian forces. Think of it as the Kharkiv counteroffensive from 2022, but in reverse. It is the same reason why Ukraine will not be conceding land past its defensive lines as a part of some sort of negotiated settlement. Doing so voluntarily creates the domino problem. Brief aside, way too much ink is being spilled about how it is imperative that Ukraine must not do this. Okay, yeah, that is true. Don't get me wrong. But it is also a fairly trivial point for those involved in the decision. Ukraine, backed by Europe, has complete agency to reject such proposals. This is not Ukraine's moment of maximum pressure, as the Financial Times is describing it. Just wondering, have we forgotten about February 2022? There was a time when no one was really sure whether Kyiv would fall into Russian hands. That is no longer the case. Back in the present, there is nothing that the United States could plausibly do to force Ukraine to put itself into a domino problem. Not when Europe is around, and not even if the worst plausible case scenario happens in Alaska. The continued conversation about this is a waste of time, and we would all be better off discussing issues where an informed debate might change policy. Anyway, I should point out that defensive lines today are not like your classic images from World War I. I know that I often use trenches as a default visualization for building defensive lines, but they are only a part of the story, a presentational convenience that hides more complexity. In modern warfare, a trench by itself is wide open, literally so from above, and welcomes enemy drone attacks. Actually, these photos are only a week old and show US soldiers in Croatia training to clear trenches in exactly that manner. This is why today's lines include dugouts hiding in patches of trees that drones have a hard time spotting. Remember the Dracaris drones that use thermite to torch trees into ashes? That is exactly why they are useful. No trees, no hidden dugouts. But these modern innovations still give way to more traditional fortifications, like Dragon's Teeth and anti-tank ditches. I know that the tank seems like a weapon of the past now that we are in the drone age, But that is misleading and fails to grasp the causal chain here. Tanks are ineffective because Dragon's Teeth and ditches restrict their movement. That is what opens them up to drone strikes. Thus, if Russia gets behind the anti-tank fortifications, then it might be full speed ahead, and we are once again in a tank moment, if not an age. One caveat there, though. Another part of the 2025-era defensive fortifications are drone walls. But the thing about a drone wall is that it is completely mobile. Thus, a break of a defensive line here only refers to a part of a defensive line now. We may witness in real time just how much a drone wall can do to slow domino problems from the earthbound walls falling. Let's conclude with the burning question here. How should we interpret what is happening in light of the imminent Trump-Putin summit? We now know its location. Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Alaska. Please get yourself acquainted with it via this stock footage as I narrate the rest of the video. The first thing that I want to point out here is that it is possible that the timing of the breakthrough is coincidental. Russia has been pushing on the front lines forever, and eventually things like this do happen. In fact, it is not the first time. There was a case following the Battle of Avdiivka that matches the same basic characteristics. But it is also fully possible that Russia is ramping up the pace because of what might happen at the summit. For the rest of the video, I will be assuming that that is true, but remember that we do not really have any way of knowing that. I think I need to emphasize a basic point going into the meeting, because it seems that the internet conversation has drifted far away from what the actual consensus position is among European leaders. Ukraine wants a ceasefire. Full stop. Russia has the initiative in the war right now. Ukraine benefits from freezing the front lines so it can further entrench its positions and halt any advances that might happen if the war to restart. Essentially, it needs to stop the type of thing that just happened. Meanwhile, the Kremlin is trying to do everything it can to stall the implementation of a ceasefire, precisely because it will do better as long as Russian troops hold the initiative. And yet, a lot of online commentary is seemingly pushing for the war to continue, I guess out of some vague sense that Ukraine has the morally correct position, and that alone will drive Ukraine to victory. But morality here does not imply military capacity, and if there is one thing that you have learned from this channel over the last 3 years, it is that the terms of a settlement to end a war must be commensurate with battlefield expectations. If you know someone who is anti-ceasefire, or maybe you like provoking people on the internet, God help you, I would recommend to you to suggest to them to consult the current positions of both Ukraine and Europe. Those state leaders are more attuned to the military realities of the situation on the ground, and the actual trade-offs involving further Ukrainian casualties, which once more tells us that Ukraine benefits from a ceasefire here. Moreover, I must note that those improved entrenchments will enhance Ukraine's bargaining position once deeper negotiations begin, and if those negotiations fail, then Ukraine will be in a better position to win militarily later, which is exactly what the anti-ceasefire crowd wants anyway. Consequently, if a ceasefire comes out of the summit, then that is a win for Ukraine. Of course, if there are strings attached, then the associated losses may supersede the benefits. But it would take a lot of strings to get that far, and in any case, Ukraine can just veto them by continuing to fight. Hold that thought until tomorrow when we actually learn what will happen. The point is, imagine that Russia is concerned that the United States is going to enforce a ceasefire under threat of punishment to Russia. The path there could be more arms to Ukraine, primary sanctions, secondary sanctions, or whatever. Who knows? Maybe someone will finally start listening to Keith Kellogg. After all, that man had a logically valid plan that has effectively been thrown in the can for the last 7 months. If so, then Russia's initiative is effectively a waning asset. The Kremlin must use it or lose it. I know that this sounds crazy given how high Russia's casualty rates are, but it is possible for Russia to be even more reckless. The Kremlin holds back, though, at least to some degree, because those Russian soldiers may be put to better use at a later time. However, if there is no later time, then paying those higher costs may be worth it while there is still the opportunity. Now, that part may all seem straightforward, but I think that there is an implication here that gets lost in the shuffle. As a preface to this, let me say that in no way is the 110 square kilometers lost a good thing for Ukraine. It is not. The thing is, though, we only see where the lines on maps move. We do not see all of the places where Russia tried to press the front and failed. And if you think that Russia was actually trying to accelerate its plans under the summit deadline, then I can guarantee you that the one salient east of Pokrovsk was not the only place it tried. So what we do not know is just how many Russian soldiers died to get that 110 square kilometers of land. Because it was not just the casualties taken in that area. It was implicitly all of the other casualties taken in all of the other locations where Russia failed. I said earlier that more time should be spent discussing topics that could meaningfully change opinions. Well, this is one of those. Taking more territory right now out of an expectation that the front lines will freeze does improve Russia's bargaining position for that reason. But one should not take it as a meaningful signal of Russia's future ability to push the front line in the absence of a ceasefire, at least not past whatever domino effects may happen in the immediate aftermath. The Kremlin always had the ability to accelerate its plans. Observing such an acceleration in the shadow of a summit should not alter one's estimation of Russia's capabilities. If anything, it should reduce that expectation, precisely because the time pressure is forcing Russia to expend resources at an inefficient rate, and it may even reduce it more if nothing comes from the salient. Meanwhile, if you want to hear more about the summit and all of the other chaos in the world right now, check out my hour-long Q&A over on the secondary channel. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.